I'll show you our premium logo. Maybe this will scare you off.
Just open up the podcast app. I'll bring it up.
Okay.
It's literally just the Saudi Arabian public investment fund.
That's our premium logo.
Controversial.
So once you're in the inner circle, you see who we truly are.
All right, James.
Raf.
We're not alone today.
No. It's our first guest of the year, I think. We didn't have anyone in January.
No.
Wow. We're behind the times. Our listeners have been so excited to have us bring on captains of industry, thinkers, dreamers.
Now, in high demand was people were like, talk about Australian startups. So we have the perfect guest, Damian Fox, Carthona Capital, partner. You are an Australian VC firm. Do you want to actually give us a rundown of Carthona Capital?
And yourself.
You give us a rundown of yourself first, like star sign, Libra, I know that.
Thanks very much, guys. Thanks for having me along. That's correct. I am indeed.
The reason I know your star sign is because you were born a day before me, so...
Right, yeah, okay.
I didn't just pick it.
Right. You didn't think you just had like a Libra vibe.
But no, sorry, anyway, that's a terrible introduction. Carthona Capital, Damo, who's Carthona? What do you do? What do you invest in?
Sure. So we're an Australian-based venture capital fund, about 360 million in funds under management, just deploying out of our third fund. Predominantly invest in Australian tech startups, but about a third of our portfolio is deployed offshore. So some mainly in the US, mainly West Coast US, but some on East Coast and in Europe as well.
Yeah, so we've had journos on, we've had founders on, we had angel investor Becky Lucas. It's time we brought in the VCs. So Damo we're going to talk about the local kind of scene, the Australian startup scene, as well as I want to kind of do a hot seat and just run through every era of kind of hot sectors from, space to fast checkouts and get your take and see what Carthona and your personal opinion is on those spaces.
What the vibe is and that stuff. But mate, also give us a bit of a rundown on does Carthona Capital have a thesis? Like, is there a particular sort of thing that you guys invest in, one particular sector of tech, one particular area, one particular type of founder? What's your thinking?
Yeah, I mean, we're pretty generalist in the sense that, like a lot of Aussie VCs, it's really too small a market here to be really too niche and specialised. Some investors have gone maybe down like a deep tech route or people who have had success building a brand-based business have maybe got a pool of capital that are very brand-focused. For us, it's all about repeatable, scalable, technology-based investments. Happy to go... Tech. But tech can be pretty broad, but, for example, we wouldn't do biotech, but we would do med tech if it was built on a technology platform, if it's like AI applications for...
So you wouldn't do Ozempic, but Theranos maybe.
So I think Theranos is a great example of like something we probably wouldn't do because it requires clinical trials. It requires...
Yeah, right.
And also it was fundamentally fraudulent.
Yeah, I mean, Yeah, so of course, that bit, but hindsight's always 2020.
Sure.
So you refuse to guarantee that you're not invested in frauds.
I can neither confirm nor deny.
Right.
But anyway, so we've kind of talked about it on Down Around a bunch about like the state of VC and how it's been, basically we had huge boom about a year ago or so now. When was the end of the boom?
But basically like a year ago, right? Like when it all sort of topped out before the collapse, maybe a year and a half.
I mean, we always pinpoint like basically when Afterpay was bought by Square/Block as almost like signifier as the top.
That was top. And as we now know, there was reporting today in Capital Brief that it seems like Block has sacked all of their Australian staff and the predicted launch of Cash App in Australia probably isn't happening. And also that Afterpay, the brand, may be at risk of being folded. So obviously, from the soaring heights of paying such an extraordinary amount of money for Afterpay to now, it's a good signifier of kind of where the tech markets have gone.
Yeah, so we're
extreme example.
Yeah, well, we're talking about like international markets. How's the Australian sector with regards to that?
Yeah, I mean, we're not immune from the global economy here, for sure. I'd say how it's slightly different is if you're on a big startup that's trying to go global, you're at the end of the day reliant on capital potentially from offshore to fuel that in your later Ds or Cs or whatever rounds it might be. And so as a result, you kind of got the same headwinds. Actually, the local ecosystem, it's in pretty good shape. If I look back to the sort of the boom era, the post-COVID Suddenly everyone's at home. Suddenly the economy hasn't fallen apart like we thought, and everything was booming. In that period, we had so many different people participating in the venture ecosystem. So everything from big corporates, everyone would have an innovation or a venture capital arm.
Yeah. Like Commonwealth Bank, what you name it.
Yeah.
NRMA probably had like a venture arm, like a startup investment
They did
hub or whatever.
Yeah, they did a more incubatory style thing where they use a third-party provider to come in and say, hey, run like workshops effectively and have startups that would kind of, if it was in their sort of strategic mandate, they would run something in that space. And also high net worths, family offices, everyone participating directly rather than through a fund.
Yep.
So that meaning like anyone who's got some cash, like literally someone is throwing 20K at an idea, at a business. I wouldn't know anything about that.
About throwing 20K at something.
No, about people throwing 20K at businesses, especially like D2C businesses. Anyway.
Well, there was a crazy moment. We reported on it back when I was editor of Business Insider. Like family offices were getting into like crypto investment and stuff. Like, it was the same era. If you had money, you were throwing it after some tech related thing, be it venture or crypto or.
Yeah, so from
It
your
made it quite
perspective,
hard.
was that? I was going to say, does it make is that
just
harder
price.
or easier?
Well, it's good for your less good investments and bad for the investments you were really trying to get into. So you had to be really diligent on pricing. A perfect example would be a business we gave a term sheet, very early stage business at a sort of 20 mil type valuation. And ultimately the round got done at 50 mil pre. And we're going, whew, like that has to be a big business for you to make multiples of your money.
Yep.
That has to be a very, very big business and be capital efficient with that amount of capital it's raised, not have to do lots of rounds down the future.
Let's go back a step. We've talked about it before, but just like what kind of return, like X return, are you looking at for on an investment? Like what's like
Your standard
what's a
venture
good
investment.
return? What's
Yeah.
a good return?
Yeah, I mean, so there's lots of ways to think about that. I think if you're thinking as a fund in its whole, ultimately what you're trying to do is deploy the capital, make a return that you're happy to. And
Across the fund.
the fund, and be able to go back to your LPs, who are your investors, typically super funds, pension funds, things like that, family offices, things like that. Be able to go back to them and say, hey, we've been able to give a really, really good return. Yes, we were in a risky asset.
What's a good return for a partner in your fund? So sorry, we should go back a step for people who don't understand. So Cathona is like, we are raising a new fund. This is hypothetical, whatever. Say we're trying to raise $100 million that we're going to deploy into a bunch of early stage startups. As like, what am I hoping? If I'm like, oh, okay, that sounds good. I'd like to have some exposure to startups. Here's $500,000 or whatever. What am I typically hoping to get from my $500,000 in 5, 6 years time, 7 years time?
Yeah, usually it's standard private equity funds, and venture capital is a form of private equity. It's usually a 5-year investment horizon and then a 5-year management period. And so, but over the 5 years, you might be doing your first check on day one, but then your last check might not be until year 3 or year 4 or whatever it is, potentially year 5 of the investment period. And so the way you sort of, when you ask me what type of returns are you looking for, it's all about, well, for your LP, so for your investors, they've got lots of different places they can invest their money. What's a good enough return that you can give them that comparatively you look good? And that's probably, and it depends a little bit on the underlying cash rate, but that's probably to be in the top quartile, you're probably in the high 20% IRR over a period of time, which means that across the fund, on average, you're sort of doing 2 or 3x your money.
And with that, you're expecting a lot of those businesses to go to zero, though.
Yeah, I mean, so then you take a step back and you go, okay, across that, maybe just say in your fund you did 10 investments, maybe you're hoping that a third of them do really well, a third go sort of so-so, and a third die. Like if that type of narrative is a really good outcome, but ultimately how good your return is across the fund is usually driven by those couple of key success cases, those 1, 2, or 3 top businesses, how many X they've done ultimately ends up deciding, how good a return the fund
You want a
as whole
Canva.
are.
You want one Canva.
Yeah, totally. I mean, if you have or an
afterpay. I mean, they got an exit.
Exactly right.
Totally. I mean, the interesting thing to also consider is dilution along the way.
Yeah.
So when you talk about how many X you made on your money, if your first check in was at a $5 million val and then you ultimately sold the business for $50 million, it's easy to go, hey, that's a 10x return. But if along that way you had to raise more and more capital, the multiple you get on the first money in, and because you've had to keep following your money and keep investing along the way, your average multiple and your average return across it might be a lot lower than 10x. It might be more like 3x.
That's right. Yep.
But because the valuations in that kind of post-COVID, like during COVID boom, were so high because there's so much demand. Every man and his dog wanted to get in on these investments. The value was maybe not as much there. Whereas right now, what's the vibe?
Yeah, so I'd say the vibe at the moment is, Well, maybe if we just look back at the last year, there was definitely a period of headline, top-line valuations dropping. As a venture investor, often you have protective rights, and so there might have been, a headline, we're doing a bridge round or extension round, but then within the actual documentation through structure, you've come up with a way to sort of protect your interests. There's an old saying which is, you set the price, I set the terms. And so the idea being that, there's always a way to find a way that, even if it's a high headline price, that you're actually getting a better outcome than might seem on.
So, for example, like what kind of terms are we talking?
So the most commonly touted stuff is things around like anti-dilution rights, liquidation preference rights.
So that anti-dilution meaning you right now own whatever 5% of this business?
So it's less than that. It's usually round specific. So at this point in time, I've invested $1 million at a $10 million valuation. If the next round is done at a valuation lower than $10 million, my percentage holding is protected. There is different variations of that. At one extreme, you can have a full ratchet, which is seen to be much more investor friendly.
All of a sudden, is worth $2 million now. So you've invested $1 million at a $10 million valuation. There's huge down round or whatever. The company is worth $2 million and it has to be liquidated. What do you get back?
Yes.
For your $1 million
So
investment?
if there's no other terms and nothing else to think about, your right is protected so that your percentage increases as if there was no down round.
Yep.
Yeah, so you would get your $1 million back.
But that's oversimplifying because
Yes.
what actually happens is that can seem quite punitive to the founder. And so you have often there's like a weighted average formula that works out for everyone's different interests depending on how much money you put in, what point in time, at what valuation. It sort of tries to do a calc that makes it as fair as possible for everyone from the founder to the early investors to the later investors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I get so coming back to the general space right now in the post tech boom era, would you say that super funds, family offices, all these sort of sources of capital we were talking about are maybe less excited about jumping into tech right now?
There's the direct investment side and then there's the investing with venture funds.
Yep.
So on the direct investing side, everyone else that was participating in the space have all but gone.
Yep.
There's it's only very experienced super angels and venture funds were really participating in a material way. And so that means all the offshore investors, all the corporates, all the sort of high net worth going direct have pulled back.
And when you say offshore, what are we talking?
So either big strategic investment, so a big corporate, or actually venture capital funds based in the US.
Yep.
Yeah, and they're just not interested in Australia anymore.
I think, when the market corrected, everyone sort of does this recalibration and you go, what am I doing? How do I make returns? What's my investment strategy? At the boom of the market, yes, I might have been doing all these things. Let's bring it back to basics. What am I meant to be doing? Do we have a competitive advantage in Australia? Maybe. Maybe if you've got capital that is far outsized compared to Australian capital, so maybe you can get into a deal for better prices or on better terms because you can sell the dream of, hey, if you do really, really well at the next round, we're going to be there for a couple $100 million check. Maybe, but realistically, there's plenty of venture funds down here, so probably not.
Yeah, during the boom if you're a big investment fund and you had 1,000 people out there looking for businesses. Everything scales back. You can't raise as much in your next fund. You've cut staff. Those 2 people who are dedicated to the Australian market are probably cut, and you're focusing on your core competencies.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Right.
Yep.
And during the correction also, people realised, there's going to be a little bit of a slowdown. So the amount of capital we've raised now, we've got to preserve for longer. So suddenly at the flick of a switch...
They have to do due diligence.
Well, there's some extreme cases of that, but for sure it's more of a, hey... Before, we were trying to get the money out the door ASAP. If we had $1 billion fund, we want it out the door in 1 or 2 years because we want to raise another $1 billion fund. Whereas now people are going, whoa, let's try and make this $1 billion last just a little bit longer. Let's slow down a little bit and raise the bar for the standard of investment we're gonna do.
But interestingly, so there's a lot less cash, I guess, floating about. But that doesn't mean the ideas are worse. Right? That's the whole weird thing, right? Market cycles. It's not like more things are getting invested in. There's more capital being deployed because the ideas were better.
Everyone was cooking.
Well, it's just just vibing on the concept of ideas and hustle culture and grind set. But now, but the reality is
there is a connection.
With good ideas.
There is a connection, right? Because at the end of the day, when you're
more
investing in
crazy
venture,
ideas can be funded.
Well, there's that side, but actually. And there's going to be, if you fund it, there's going to be further capital down the line. But also, as a VC, even if you invested pre-revenue at, in inverted commas, idea stage, you're not investing in an idea. You're investing in the execution of a team, right? And so if you're a really good entrepreneur who's built this really, really good piece of technology or you've got this great idea, whatever it might be, you know what? like the good ones, when it was really hard to raise capital, they were going, hey, maybe this week isn't the time to launch my startup. Maybe I'll stay in stealth. I'll continue to develop. I'll do whatever it might be that's ultimately going to help the business long term. But maybe this week isn't the week for me to be fundraising. And so you actually saw a period there where, at the beginning to middle of last year, where a lot of really good potential future entrepreneurs were holding back. There was a massive shift. I want to say October, end of last year, where suddenly it was like the quality of the pipe coming through, we just went boom. Like it was like, week, suddenly it was like, oh, cool, we're back on here. Like some really, we've got some, it's been long enough, we see some really cool stuff.
And these are people that, as you say, were holding off. They had a business concept, potentially they had a team, whatever, but they weren't raising the money.
Potentially
to
like
execute
reflection in the public markets with like IPOs, right? Like
They
companies
kind of
not putting off their IPOs, waiting for better times. So now you have fantastic businesses like Reddit about to go public.
Totally, yeah. Well, I mean, I guess I kind of answered the question I was going to ask, but like the market stuff, how does that reflect in what Australian teams are working on, the kind of startups that you are seeing come through your pipeline? Has that changed? Is it a different type of business that is building as compared to when we're at the absolute peak and things were pumping and flying along?
Yeah, I mean, I think the industries and the type of businesses that is relatively consistent.
Yep.
It's more the personality type of the person.
Interesting.
It's much more, the people that you're seeing now are much more, in inverted commas, true entrepreneurs.
Okay.
There was a lot of people.
Like describe, for example, these people's daily like morning routine versus
No.
like height of the dynamic. Like
I don't mean that. I don't mean it like that. I mean it more they genuinely, but as opposed to, hey, I'm a person who could be a lawyer, an investment banker, a McKinsey management consultant, blah 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 blah. A senior person at Google, whatever. A very like high caliber individual who just went, hey,
there's so much money around.
There's so much money in startups. I could do a startup. I should just do it, but doesn't actually have that burning passion to solve a problem or do something. Or it's almost like a very quick like transition of, oh, here's a cool career path I hadn't really thought about.
Yeah, if biotech was hot, they'd be in biotech.
This is exactly what we talked about last week. Like the idea that at any point in time, there's always some industry that just attracts weapons. Like people who, they're obviously competent, they're operators, etc. Maybe they don't have specific skill sets in anything in particular, but where they see the money, they see kind of like the excitement, the energy, and they just go there and go for it. And that was tech.
But that can be a good thing. That can be a good thing because actually those people can be very impressive people and have a high chance of succeeding in whatever they decide to focus their life on. But when things get hard, that type of person is more likely to look for a way out or an exit or,
run for the
hills when the going gets tough.
Yeah.
Whereas that person who's almost like, the accidental entrepreneur who's just wanted to solve a problem, just wanted to do this, saw this big opportunity and was like, hey, I actually know more about this than anyone else in the world.
Yep.
Or actually, I actually know I know how to solve this and just
right.
I know how to do this. I know how to solve this problem and go like it doesn't matter what the capital markets are doing.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, we're investing, we're talking about the time frames we invest for. It's sort of from start to finish. It can be 5, 7, 10 years long that you're in this investment. Like actually what you shouldn't be considering is what IPO markets are now. You should be thinking what it's going to look like in 5, 7, 10 years, right? Which is pretty hard to do. Like, how do you know what the economic climate's going to be or when the next pandemic's going to be? Like, that's pretty hard to pick now, right? So it's actually, in some ways, that encourages you to invest earlier rather than later. So,
so then what's hot right now? What are you excited about right now in Australia?
As in sector-wise?
Yeah. What's catching your eye?
So obviously, I know you guys have talked a lot about this in a few of the podcasts, but AI is obviously the theme that's running through everything.
Yeah.
We see.
What's the state of AI in Australia?
Yeah, I mean, look, what I'd say is the AI industry is definitely evolving at an incredibly rapid pace, and Gen AI is obviously at the forefront of that. There's actually lots of other big, really, really important parts of AI which sort of hasn't captured the media focus quite as much.
Yep.
What I'd say is in Australia, if you're thinking about it from an investing point of view, there's different parts of the stack you can play in an AI. You can play in it the sort of foundational building blocks part, or you can actually play in the application to a certain industry. I think in Australia, it's relatively hard to be playing in the building blocks element just because...
We're talking about we should kind of, as examples, like OpenAI, is
Yeah,
building blocks.
like building an LLM.
a model, like
You know,
building a model, right?
You haven't heard much about Australian businesses building an LLM in much the same way as you will see an OpenAI or other American businesses, or someone like Mistral,
yeah.
in France.
There are individuals though, like if you go on to like Hugging Face or one of those big communities which share the models, there is a definite, I would say, overrepresentation is not the right word, but there is definitely a strong cohort of people in Australia going and building different models to apply in different circumstances.
Yep.
That is a slightly different thing to, hey, I'm building an AI business that's venture fundable. But yeah.
And then the other kind of layer you're kind of talking about further up the stack is I'm building AI for lawyers or whatever, like applying other people's LLMs, rappers, kind of that vibe.
Yeah, and the challenge there is that all these language models have been built largely open source. And so actually it's pretty easy to build the wrapper. So how do you build a business and how do you build a product that you have a unique advantage in, that you can build a moat around, so that if you raise capital, you go and build to scale, that it doesn't just get switched off, or there's not a competitor doesn't just emerge and suddenly all that money and all that effort and all that time you spent building something.
You've just been commodified, right? And you
Well, I mean, the great beauty of the LLM business that you can see is that, GPT, Claude, whatever it may be, Meta's Llama, these are all generalist models that can do all sorts of different things and have all sorts of different things in their training set. And a great wrapper will take that and make it user applicable. So like a regular user who works at a law firm can boot up like a legal LLM or a legal wrapper and access the data they need to use in the right circumstance. But like the functionality is right there. And anyone can come up and build a competitor that's more user-friendly or specifically applicable to a certain business. Someone might go and pitch Freehills or whatever about building their own LLM. They don't need to use like an off-the-shelf legal alternative. It's a really like fast-moving space where it doesn't seem like there are almost any moats aside from
proprietary data is kind of that's like an interesting space. You hear about like these startups raising money in order to buy like hospitals' data records and things like that, and like get your hands on some proprietary data that no one else has access to, so you actually do have some kind of moat. But so if you listener, if you're thinking about an interesting space where there's some proprietary data that isn't on the open web that hasn't already been scraped, there's a business there, man.
And also, we're going to talk about this maybe next week, but 23andMe is their stock price is almost zero now. If you want to buy the genetic data of all of America and build something around that.
It's been leaked, hasn't it? Is that one of the issues?
It has been leaked, but whatever.
Have you guys done any DNA like?
No, we're gonna talk about it next week in a little bit more detail. But if you have special insights, please.
No.
We're not bringing you back for it.
Well, maybe this is a good time then to get into the hit list of different areas. So you're not invested then in any kind of DNA tech?
No, we haven't done anything like that. No.
Well, so basically what I wanted to do was just go through. Fads is the wrong word, but like
Trends. So
let's start.
Big movements. What are they looking like right now? How is your funds thinking about it?
Yeah.
What's your thinking about it? Give us the inside VC view on
Internet of Things to start with. IoT.
So IoT obviously was very popular maybe 10 years ago, was kind of like the AI buzzword.
Yep.
If I think about it.
I mean,
2012, 2013,
my microwave's going to be connected to
exactly.
the internet.
My fridge is connected to the internet was kind of the face of IoT.
The gag, yeah. But, there's lots of like wireless tech and what have you. Your doorbell.
How do you think of
I mean,
IoT?
that's a great example. Like Ring, right? That's a great example of actually an amazing execution of hardware in a home that is done an amazing job, right?
Yep.
So I guess my thoughts on IoT at the moment, if I'm sort of looking at a business that comes in and it says, hey, we're our IoT business, is it's not like AI where everyone feels like they have to have those buzzwords in their pitch deck.
Yep.
But it doesn't necessarily preclude the investment. It's not like, hey, that was a theme from 10 years ago. I don't care about it anymore. Actually, it just depends on fundamentally the product.
Yep.
If we think about IoT actually in our day-to-day lives, it happened,
yeah.
right? It really has impacted our lives. Everything at home, everything you do at home, like the fridges did happen. Your scale like connects to you when you get up in the morning. Your whatever you
everything like my fan, your phone, my blinds, like everything is
from your phone. You can go, oh, the sun's come up, and you can press a button and your blinds go down in your house.
Yeah, like literally almost anything I buy now off Amazon that has a battery in it, it's got some app. Which is kind of IoT. Like, I guess the initial kind of pitch of IoT was like this network of all things talking to each other like without you there. And I guess that has kind of happened in that it does vaguely talk to your phone, but just one of those things that happened. It's not really like a.
I think the area that struggled with IoT is things like agriculture and construction, things like that, where I think everyone went, oh great, you're gonna have this little BLE-enabled tag that's going to be on every single one of my sheep or my cows or whatever, and I'm going to, from that, be able to know exactly, where the best grass is, and so therefore where I need to spend more time, where I need to find it, like how much weight, somehow it connects into the bloodstream of the animal, and then be able to know exactly how fat or not fat it is, and whether they need to feed them more. All that sort of data that comes from that. I think those areas have been hard, and I think it's just fundamental.
Like why? Why? Like,
I think it's just the customer. I think it's just the end customer.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, those businesses, it hasn't solved a big enough pain point, or the cost of doing it has been preventative. And so from a person managing a farm or whatever.
No, because that sounds like a great example. I can imagine 10 years ago, it's like, this is the future of agriculture.
That was basically the claim. Like the IoT pitch was like, yes, you're going to have connected scales and you'll be able to turn your lights on and off on your phone. But the real money is going to be in like these industrial and agricultural business applications where like scaled businesses that have a whole bunch of different factories or farms or whatever are going to be spending a huge amount of money to, as you say, like track sheep or whatever it may be. And you're right. I think that hasn't really played out, except in like narrow cases.
I assume the cost versus the benefit is just not there, right? Like,
well, it's fun using that specific example. I think the biggest pain point has been having power, and so you've had to have a battery on this thing, and so how often can you say
I've got to charge my sheep? Like it's enough to have got to charge my watch, my headphones,
this country's gone to the bloody dogs, mate.
But it's also just the connecting, right? Like in order to things you need to have a substation, you need to be able to connect. Like this sheep, like even with BLE, which has got like a meshing technology, so it's not just it's not like LoRa or like one of those old school like you send a ping of small amount of data a long distance. It allows you to send. It's like your Apple AirTag. Like by someone else's AirTag being there, it can send information and on-send and on-send and on-send.
Well, this was that company we talked about in the very early episode, Helium. It was like the mesh internet that was also crypto powered with a token. Huge fraud, but they claimed that Lime scooters were one of their big customers. The reason they got so much buzz is they were actually solving a problem, which is exactly as you say. The connectivity is an issue when you're talking about these like vast spaces, agricultural, industrial, business sort of applications that aren't just connecting your home Wi-Fi to a fridge or a scale or whatever.
Cool. IoT, still hot. No, IoT is everything. Fast checkouts. Did you ever get involved in any fast checkouts?
So we never actually did a direct investment. One business we're in, particular audience, offers it as like a side offering. It's not directly fast checkout. Theirs is more on the discoverability of products, but then the like natural extension is the alignment of being able to do a fast checkout.
What do you think? Because like that was hot. Like there was a bunch of different options for fast checkouts. Yeah, and it's kind of coalesced around Apple Pay, Stripe, Shopify, Shop Pay.
Yeah, I got to say,
Pay, really.
Shopify has nailed it the best in terms of a cross merchant, as long as you're on a Shopify platform, being able to cross retailer, be able to have it in a single place, very, very quick, all your data's solved. As long as you've got that account, bang, it's straight away there and all your tracking data's there, everything's there. There's the fast guys, like I don't know if you remember that story.
We did an episode on them actually.
Oh, right. Yeah, so obviously that was a bit of a shock to the world ecosystem. Everyone saw them raising huge amounts of money and from Stripe and like leading investors around the world. And suddenly the revenue came out of 50 grand or something and everyone went, oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, it's one of those scale plays, right? Like you just have to, if you're only taking such a small percentage of, because you have to, I mean, you need to be huge.
Yeah, I think in that instance, how they raised funds was based on indications of commitment. Basically, different retailers that said, hey, if you can implement this, we will buy this and pay this amount of money. And so to an investor, that's like, oh, great, that's a real pipe. Not just, hey, I'm going to pitch all these people and we've got different stages of our sales pipeline and this is how many people we're going to try and sell to. That gave investors confidence that, hey, they've actually got a real pipeline here if they execute well here. But it sounds like, look, I don't really know what happened there, but it sounds like they didn't execute.
But they didn't in the end, evidently.
Fintech in general.
Yeah, I mean, so I would say we're definitely known in the market as being overweight fintech. We do a lot of it, sort of reflects each of the partners' backgrounds. We've all come from finance and investment banking or whatever sort of backgrounds compared to some of other people's who might have come from technology backgrounds, things like that. We had a big exit business called Credible. Aussie founder went to set up the business in San Francisco, listed it here on the ASX for about 300 million, and then Fox acquired it just when Lachlan took over Fox and it became Fox Corp. It was their first acquisition I think they did, and that was for about 585 million Aussie. And that's when we exited that business. That business, is, by all reports, seems to be continuing to go very, very well. If you think about our current live in our fund portfolio companies, the fintech businesses are definitely growing pretty rapidly. Some examples are Indebted, Valiant, Driver. Who else? Defer it.
And we've talked about this on Dano before, that fintech in Australia actually does seem to be a pretty healthy space. Do you disagree?
No, I would just say fintech is a little bit like the AI conversation we're having with finance. Huge. Finance encompasses everything. Any business, there is a finance element to it. And so as a consequence, if you have a financial product or a technology product that can help improve the way the finance of that operates, it's just naturally going to exist. And I think also in Australia, as an economy, we're used to the Macquarie banks or whatever it is of the world succeeding. We've actually got relative for our size, quite a developed financial system.
Yeah.
And so people can naturally, and if you think about our big four banks, they're pretty sophisticated and quite large.
They're pretty tech forward.
They probably compete at the global scale. And so as a consequence of that, I think in some ways it's easier to get traction. If you've got a good product, it's easier to get traction in that.
Yeah, we've got the infrastructure laid down. We've got the transfer capacity that's even some other advanced economies like the US are only kind of just catching up on. But also in fintech, fintech's very broad, as you say, encompasses a huge range of businesses. But there are some of them where it completely crashed, like the neobank attempts.
It's super interesting that space. It was actually something that was on our radar, from, I'm going to say 2014, 2015. We'd seen the successes in the UK in particular, and we'd gone, there's a big opportunity for this. We ultimately couldn't get there. It's actually a good example of a space where high net worths really squashed any sophisticated investor out of the market, because it was very easy for someone who's worked in finance to go, hey, and got a bit of money to go, hey, I get that's a problem, and I get that if you get you become an ADI and you become this thing, that this thing will fundamentally be worth X hundreds of millions of dollars. So therefore, of course, at idea stage, I'm happy to invest at a $50 million valuation, and every venture fund's going, we just can't get there. How is this thing at an idea stage on a PowerPoint presentation worth $50 million? And you still, and by the way, you haven't got a solution to the new ADI framework. You're going to be put into this sandbox, blah 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 blah. To be honest, all the VCs, we all got squeezed out of it, and then it ended up being the right decision.
Ended up not working, because none of these businesses could actually build their revenue product before they were starting to,
Actually, we did have a little bit of a play in the space in a business ultimately that failed, a business called Wildcard. Our view on all of that stuff was always that at the end of the day, the only way a neobank is going to make money is if you've got a better way of a cheaper way of acquiring customers than other people. And the cost of acquiring a customer in the financial space is we're talking hundreds of dollars per customer.
Yep.
And so how do you get that to be worth hundreds of dollars to you in a short enough time so you can pay for your acquisition? And so we invested in that business thinking, hey, these guys are doing some really cool customer acquisition things. Ultimately, the business couldn't get enough traction, and so it failed. But that was kind of a smallish. We didn't swing very hard, but a smallish play in the space.
Okay, VR. I remember you guys actually inside baseball. The first time I tried an Oculus, was in the Cathona offices.
Yeah.
But you guys,
that was the DK2 Oculus.
This is the kind of access I have, folks. You were playing around in VR. I remember some company you guys had that was spatial VR thing.
Yeah, it's called zero latency.
Yeah. What's the VR? We're going to put metaverse to the side unless it's fundamental. But VR space, both in Australia, what are your thoughts?
So maybe let's talk about that investment. How we thought. So this was, for everyone's context, this was just in end of 2013, beginning of 2014. Facebook, as it was then called, acquired Oculus for some stupid amount of money, $2 billion, but then later I think came out as actually more like $3 billion. Suddenly there was this kickoff of, oh wow, VR actually is going to be a thing. We were looking at the space, saw it as a really exciting thematic, but were trying to work out how to get exposure to the sector. So we didn't want to invest in the hardware because you have to spend billions of dollars to go
R&D is
build the
huge,
hardware.
yeah.
It's just it's hard as a VC fund with a $100 million individual fund to like compete against a Facebook. It's just not going to happen. And then you look at the content and it's like, oh, well, it's kind of like investing in a game. Like it's kind of brand driven. How do you, like, someone might be able to make one good game, but then people are going to shift to the next game. And how do you retain user base? Like it's
not really what you guys do.
It's not really what we do. We invest in the business, not on the content.
Yep.
And then we also couldn't get our heads around actually the social shift that would need to happen for people to not, like, everyone's used to looking at screens to, hey, we're not going to do that anymore. We're all going to just sit down on the couch and have this screen strapped to our eyes. We felt like there was quite a big social shift or change that needed to happen, and you know, maybe that's going to happen soon.
Well, I mean, we're the better part of a decade later, and that shift has not happened. I mean, like, now the Apple Vision Pro, we've talked about it a whole bunch. It's probably one of the best dice rolls on this. Obviously, we've now seen memes of people out and about and using them, which we never saw with the Quest, I might add, which I thought was interesting. I mean, yes, they're incredibly cringe videos, like the guys in Chinese restaurants wearing them, or some guy driving a car while wearing them. We don't necessarily endorse this kind of behavior. But that said, there were no memes of people doing that with the Quest 3 or whatever. Yeah. So there's a level of social acceptance coming. But
fundamentally, yes, it's
the social shift has not actually happened.
It still hasn't happened. I think that it's going to be a curiosity seeing someone in a VR headset in public for a long time yet, but let alone 10 years ago we're talking. So sorry, we interrupted though. So you couldn't get your head around that, I think rightly probably so.
Yeah, I mean, we could have been completely wrong on that, but yeah. So we invested in a business called Zero Latency. They do location-based VR. So you physically go to a big warehouse. You're able to take a step, and it's all untethered. And so as you take a step in the real world, you see it through the vision of the headset, of the head-mounted display. And so we saw that as, this is a really exciting way for people to have a higher experience, and also it's kind of a novel thing can go there. It's more a traditional business compared to some, like if you think about scalability of that type of business, it's not like a digital good that can just suddenly you get some traction and it goes massive.
There's marginal costs.
Yeah, it is an old school operating business in some sense. But because of the popularity of it, they were able to, like, they've now got over 100 sites around the world. We did a minority sell down of our position. So we sold half our stake to a private equity group called Advent. And so we still...
Nice to learner.
Yeah, for us, it was about giving, because it'd been in the business for so long, it was about returning some capital to people, and then people got a decent return. But also recognizing that the opportunity is still massive in the business, and so being able to stay in the business. The other thing that challenged that business was COVID. You can imagine people had to physically turn up to these sites. When COVID happened, it was suddenly like, that revenue went from tens of millions of dollars to zero in like a second.
Yep.
And then they had the challenge of managing across the world, because they're all, they're in 100 countries or something, like trying to manage all the different, in this country there's this lockdown rules, and this one there's not, trying to manage that all virtually was a massive challenge. But they're basically back up and running, and got pretty monthly growth rates in the tens of percentages and doing incredibly well. So
for the record, I should say I do actually think the social shift will happen. These things always take a long time, like social shifts. I mean, they do and they don't. I guess we've had this discussion.
Apple's very good at making that social shift happen, right?
We talked about that with the AirPods as an example. It's like when the AirPods first came out and you have like a little white stick hanging out of your ear.
And you're like,
literally for like 3 months, it's like, that's weird. And then 3 months later, it's just like, that is what headphones look like now.
And look, and they still look kind of goofy, but they're fully instantiated into the culture, right?
I mean, like objectively, they look goofy. Well, there's a lot of things that objectively look goofy, and we roll with it.
If you chat to a 10-year-old kid, their view on VR is totally different, right? Like the games that they play, like it. Whereas if we go back to like our days, but like young kids now, like it's pretty often that they've got some VR game going. I think it's different. What'll be interesting is how they deal with the challenge of, at the moment when you try and do, in inverted commas, work in VR, the way they solve that is by basically setting up virtual screens and building it. And it's kind of like that defeats the purpose of bit. Like there's no point having this unique way of seeing the world and then putting a screen.
Yeah, replicating
the screen.
Yeah.
But in time, as it gets better, actually the functionality, you're going to be able to drag, put bits behind here, do this, move things to the side, actually the way it's presented. The content kind of, it's one of those things. It's almost like, to be honest, the iPhone. If you think in the old days, before there were apps, it was kind of like my Motorola Razr had the web, and I was like, oh yeah, why do I need an iPhone?
Yeah,
but
exactly.
then now it's like, oh, okay, cool. All the apps are amazing, so I need to have my smartphone.
That's true. So
Yeah, it took a while to like work out like social media basically, and like image based, like the news feed basically required the format of a phone. So like, what is that for VR?
Yeah, soon we'll all be driverless in our cyber trucks, driving on auto, a Vision Pro 3 strapped to our face, going 150 kilometers an hour.
Yeah.
Now that we can endorse.
This is an official endorsement. Space.
Yeah.
What's up? What's going on up there?
Yeah, what about space
What's
tech?
your view? Are aliens real? No view. All right, fair enough.
I don't have a view on aliens. I'm sure the truth is out there somewhere.
Okay, great. Yeah.
So space. Look, the challenge investments in the space scene have had is just the amount of capital expenditure that's required to do the thing. And you're also limited by, in order to get certified or in order to get investment from any of the big agencies or from NASA or like someone like that, is the product usually has to be proven in space, which means that you need to buy
Get
a
it
piece,
up there.
You need to pay to be a part of the payload going up in one of the rockets.
right.
There, say there's a couple each year and it's not that prohibitively expensive to do it. We did an investment in a business called Hubble, not a big swing, but a San Francisco-based business. Was the co-founder, CTO of Life360, which is a portfolio company, and.
Snitch tech company.
And they're going up this year, I think, the launch for their product to be put up.
What is it?
So it's technology that'll be attached to a satellite, and there's some elements on the satellite as well. But you can connect Bluetooth connectivity direct to the satellite.
All right. When you said Hubble, I was thinking that's a huge humble brag. Be like,
Not-
Yeah, we're investing in Hubble.
little investment, little company coming out of the US, the Hubble Space Telescope, folks.
More broadly, this is way outside your remit, but like, and this is a question to you as well, James. Like, what do we reckon the deal is with? At the moment, it's basically a free for all for sending satellites up there, and you can just pump them. Like, what's going to happen here? What's going to happen?
Do you think there's going to be too much crap up there?
Well, no, we're rules, like rules of space. I know that there are some kind of
There
at
are
the moment,
rules.
like there are rules like we're not going to put weapons up there, but they're kind of experimenting with that. And like, what are we just going to keep putting satellites up there until there's
There's different layers, right? If you're in the low Earth orbit bits, I think the reality is people are putting pretty cheap satellite, like CubeSats and all those small little sats up there, and they don't have much stability and also to be able to push them back into place. So they go up there and they've got a couple year life cycle, and they just let them burn up in the atmosphere, and they put them up, and then they burn up, and they put them up again. It's just cheaper to do that than actually have a propulsion system that keeps them in place. Then you've got the higher levels of satellites, but yeah, for sure. I mean, we've just seen the Russian cosmonaut that's just come back, set the record for most amount of time in space ever by a human. It was 800 something days. I don't know what, 868 days.
Oh, you get
something
bored,
like that.
folks. I couldn't do it.
his muscles must be
Truly atrophied.
yeah.
I know they've got those like treadmills that you sort of strap yourselves into so you don't fly away. So you should be fine. That's my take. He's fine.
I mean, the International Space Station is actually a really cool, amazing feat that humanity It's
We came
literally
together.
Russia and the US.
Yeah.
It's working. It's kind of in the current environment of destabilization in the Middle East and Russia, Ukraine, and China and the Pacific and all that sort of stuff. It's pretty amazing that
We haven't had any space fights.
I'm sure there's been space fights, but personal ones, not geopolitical.
Yeah, all right. Just because there's not a lot. Anyone, when you live with someone long enough, you start.
If I was up there in space with you for 830 days, we'd be beefing, brother.
Yeah, fair enough. I'll beef with anyone within that time for sure. I understand that some people see me as abrasive. All right, let's get to the good ones. Actually, no. Before we get to the good ones, quantum.
Oh yes, yeah. So super cool. I want to invest in the space, but it's just time. A big thing for VC is picking the right time. And with some of the things we've talked about already, things like VR, what makes you go, oh, has it worked out yet? It's timing ultimately, both on the technology development side, but then the consumer adoption or the ultimate buyer adoption. Look, it just feels just too far away. I mean, Michelle Simmons has done an amazing job. Same with
It's University of New South Wales,
University of New South Wales, and same with at University of Sydney. Like they've done an amazing job, and they're doing some really, really cool stuff. And they've both got some funding and
Well, I know that like the government, the CSIRO, are really like leaning into maybe Australia can be a hub for quantum computing stuff, because we haven't exactly missed the boat, but kind of going back to what we were talking about before, if you want to win an AI, at least AI as it's currently construed, you need a vast amount of processing power. You need the talent, like the people who are particularly trained on being able to build, maintain, expand LLMs or whatever. The kind of people that are commanding $10 million salaries at AI companies. Whereas like quantum computing is kind of like a new paradigm where no one is a winner yet. So I know the government, for example, is really looking at Australia could potentially play in this. But again, even that is like, we could potentially play in this in 15 years or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's just hard to know when. Is it 5, 10, 15?
Yeah.
Or is it like 50 or 60? It's really hard. And
Yeah.
the problem is it'll then come and then the valuations of everything will be crazy. And
Totally.
it's hard, but like I would love to.
Yeah.
But I can't. Unfortunately, the worst thing about my job...
CathonaCapital.com.au.
No, .com. No AU.
No AU. If you've got something that you think that you can monetize, like at least within a decade. How about that? There you go. That's the pitch. Now, let's get to the fun stuff. No, I mean, quantum, very interesting. It does seem like we missed the boat on nuclear. We've missed the boat nuclear. I don't want to be like George Bush. AI, you can get a lot more money elsewhere, so why would you do it in Australia? I'm sure there's some interesting AI stuff out there. Yeah, it would be good if if quantum is a thing, for us to have a bunch of expertise locally, for sure. Kids, if you're an 18-year-old, you're wondering what to get into, personally, I'd say microchips, but why not quantum?
I want to become a musician.
Want to become a musician, get an advance from a record label, put it all stupidly in Apple stocks, and Bob's your uncle.
Should have bought Tesla. That's the thing. Back then, that was like early days of Tesla, right?
Like, but I'm a safe guy. I just put 100% of your assets in one big business.
You're comfortable with your choices in the long run?
Oh yeah, I wouldn't do anything differently. Crypto, which brings us to crypto. Any crypto vibes?
What I'd say is it's hard to be raising, if you're a crypto startup, it's hard to be raising venture money at the moment.
Because I've got this idea.
Okay.
Go on.
Yeah, I mean, the hard thing about this sector is kind of the same with anything that goes through a big hype cycle. There's a reason I went through a big hype cycle, and that is that the ultimate fundamental technology or the application of it is still there, and that hasn't gone away.
And it's interesting. We've said this on Down Around. The concept in general is interesting, like zero trust. It's like trustless, blah, blah, blah.
Trustless transactions, decentralized money.
But
whatever.
Did you go big in crypto?
So we didn't. Our fund is technically able to hold tokens, but we've never held tokens. The reason we set that up was more if we did an equity investment in something and they decided to do a coin split, token issue, like is it split out? That's kind of why we've set it up that way. What I'd say is that we did some enabling technology, invested in a business that helps solve the compute side. So look, we've had a bit of a foray into it. It's more, to be honest, it's more a compute play. But back then when we made the investment, the biggest use of compute by far was mining crypto. But then EIP 1559 and the move from proof of work to proof of stake happened, and suddenly you can make money mining, and the world changed.
Yeah.
I think coming in the door today, there's just been so much fraud and so much trust broken by investors that it's going to take some time for investors to be happy to stand in front of their investors and say, yes, we made a really good investment here. We believe in it 100%. It sort of feels like something that only the brave who will ultimately, someone there is gonna make some money and do well.
Yeah, there's an interesting question of like LPs. Like, would any of the like major LPs investing in a major VC fund be happy if you sat down at your general meeting and were like, we've put a huge amount of money into crypto or a crypto technology company or infrastructure thing, and have them be like, what about FTX?
Yeah.
What about that whole situation? SBF? Well, is that who you're investing in?
Yeah.
Is that the guy you're giving money to?
Yeah. Unfortunately, there is a bit of public perception or sort of public media element to what you're investing in.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, your venture, you're meant to be investing in innovation. You're not meant to be swayed by that sort of stuff. Crypto didn't just go away. Like if you look at the price of Ethereum and Bitcoin,
it's like doubled in the last 12 months or so. Right?
I mean, it just seems to be Look, I assume what's driving all of that are the big market making funds like the Optivas or whatever of the world that are just it's a
Wash
way.
trading?
Well, it's more just the market making, right? And so they're putting huge volumes through, I assume. But it's a great leading indicator that we never had in VC, is being able to go, oh, hey, interest rates look like, oh, they're plateauing. Actually, we're back to growth again, and suddenly waking up and seeing crypto prices and going, great. Like, oh, cool. Like, that's what the sophisticated money market guys, that's kind of how they're thinking. Like, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, and I guess the other part of it is, the crypto creed has always been, it's fine that we've washed out all the speculators and now we're going to build something
Now we're
that's
going to build.
useful. We're going to build. It is time to build. And it's like, well, show me the money. Like, show me a product.
Yeah.
Show me, like, the stuff that you say underpins, or like, we'll build on top of this technology that isn't just for rank speculation by retail investors or whatever. Because, as you say, the technology is interesting. Maybe something will come through, and there will be, I imagine, VC investors who will benefit hugely from that if it does happen.
What I feel the worst for is actually NFTs, right? I remember the days when like NFT was something that I remember the way I thought of NFT was very different till suddenly some person said, "Oh, have you bought any NFTs?" And I was like, "What exactly do you mean by that?
Have you bought any pudgy penguins?" Mate?
Yeah, that's literally what they meant. They meant like, had you bought this stupid bloody picture of something that like, oh, you could be the first one and it's going to be saved forever, and you're like, okay,
yeah.
Like, and I was like, no, like you get like NFT is about something that's fundamentally non-fungible, like, but in-game asset or a piece of art, it could be physical piece of art.
That's how I had it explained to me, and I was like, oh, this is cool. Like, I can buy 1/10,000th of a famous painting in this way, and I do own it. Like, I have this, non-fungible asset.
Well,
like, it's not just like a website or whatever. They were really pumped on it in music because they were like,
music's a perfect example.
Yeah, you release this song and you can on-sell the song. If you're you can be an early investor in an album, etc., and still get royalties for as long as the song exists. Blah 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 blah. But yeah, then it was as you say,
it's a pretty quickly attained
I have
picture
of a monkey.
If it does,
and every like man and his dog was just talking about it. Your cab driver home would be like, "Oh yeah, I bought that," and you're like, "Oh god." Like,
yeah. So I mean, if it does come back in the original pitch form, I assume they have to find a new name for it, a new brand. I mean, we went through a round of businesses essentially releasing NFTs, but like calling it something else. Like Reddit came out with like their own essentially NFT platform, but didn't call them NFTs. This was at the tail end of the crash of them. Smart, obviously, that didn't take off. I don't think the Reddit.
Your little avatar.
I think
things.
it's merged into the avatar, like the in-game asset avatar thing.
Yeah.
Right? That's what it's merged
into.
into.
I don't think they're on a blockchain anymore, right?
They were originally, I think, but I'm not sure if they still are. But anyway, the point being, if it's going to come back, that the brand name NFT is pretty well tainted at this point by that stuff. So anyway, whatever.
But yeah, what are you excited about? Let's end on this. Like, is there anything that right now, if someone came to you, obviously, like, it's not really your job to come up with the businesses, but, what's something that excites you?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've touched on lots of things already. I mean, some of the big areas that we haven't touched on, energy stuff.
Okay. Yeah, of course, yeah.
We're all moving to this world of like electric vehicles and everything we do now, the way rooftop solar, connected homes, all that sort of stuff. There's going to be huge amounts of opportunity there. Once again, it's got its challenges. ESG.
Energy markets are like just one of those mega dark arts things that seem incredibly confusing to me. Like just, just energy, like buying and selling.
It's just because it's a market. It's because it's a market that's not open, really. Like you as an individual can't participate in it, right? Really. I mean, you can, but really,
there's little transparency.
Yeah.
Like you have to go through an intermediary. I guess there's not enough competition in that sense. Like you can't just, if your energy retailer is taking a certain percentage clip of, you pump it to the grid and you get a certain amount of money. It's not like, you can shift from ComSec to stake to other share trading platforms depending on what commission rate you want to pay. Like it's just kind of like, that's just the rate that you get, and there's kind of nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
And take what you get. There's a lot. Energy's a huge thing. ESG, I think, ESG enabling technologies or sustainability enabling technologies are going to be very huge. I think.
So if I came to you and said, I've solved climate change with this small device that everyone just has to buy in their homes, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean that sounds great. Yep,
Got the
done.
checkbook
Done.
open?
Yeah.
Okay, now I just need to work it out.
But no more like you think about like all the big
the
real
reporting
money
stuff,
like the 2030 things that all the big
mandatory climate reporting, like someone's got to solve that. That's a fucking pain in the ass for businesses.
Yeah, and just automating that and to be honest, if you speak to most pension funds and super funds, who are ultimately the people that sit at the top of the chain, all their money is ultimately either invested in either private or public companies or whatever it might be. It's ultimately all connects up to the real money guys at the top. They've all got this 2030 date that they've all agreed to be like reporting on their carbon emissions and stuff like that. And they look at their portfolio and they're like, oh God, I have no idea, right? And so being able to automate all that sort of stuff, let alone that's now not even looking at like supply chains or anything like that. But increasingly, it's just going to become a cost of business. Like when you do your, you pay your X amount of dollars to ASIC or whatever to have your company registered, like a couple $100 a year or whatever the number is, it's going to be thought of like that. It's just the cost of doing business. You need to report on that in the same way you need to report on your tax. And so technology, and it's interesting to see the speed at which that's changed from, hey, this is a sort of altruistic, nice to have, something that just sort of goes to the ethos of the firm or whatever, to, no, this is no longer just a BS slide at the back of your pitch deck. Like this has to be, this is a problem that you need to solve and you need to report to the board on how you solve this issue.
Or you're going to have class actions and whatnot.
Correct. Yeah. And so that's pretty interesting. What else haven't we touched on?
About batteries.
Yeah.
That's energy.
You're not into
That's energy.
The problem with batteries is actually the underlying technology is actually not anything new. It's like a chemical reaction that's happening. So it's hard for us to play in that space, I think. Yeah.
All right. So thank you, Damian Fox from Cathona Capital, for joining us. If you, the listener, I'm now speaking directly to you, the listener, if you've solved climate change, hit him up. Are you? I mean,
Actually, hit us up.
Yeah.
First.
So
hit us up first.
Let us represent you. That's kind of.
I mean, I'll just jump in quickly. Honestly, I wasn't joking when we said we invest early stage. We invest right at company formation. So if anyone's got great ideas or a great business, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. My email is just Damian, spelled with an A, Damian at carthonacapital.com.
When there's fear, be greedy. When there's greed, be fearful. And it's good to
how true that is, Raf. How true that is.
People, what's the saying? People always overestimate something in the short term, but underestimate in the long term.
Yeah. If you got any of those pithy sayings, email them. Send them to us.
What's another good one? What's lemons ripen early?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Hey, Raf.
Hey, James.
Did you know that you can get an extra episode of Down Round every single week on top of the one that you're already getting?
Yeah, I knew that.
Well, obviously you know, but the person is, I'm using you as a vessel to explain.
Sorry, as I'm the listener. No, go on, tell me more, James. How much does it cost?
A mere $7 a month, Raf.
Okay, where do I go to find out more about this?
You go to downround.net.
Okay, I want it.
Well, I'm sure you do.
I feel like I'm missing out by not having it.
Exactly. No ads. Second episode per week. And a few other little goodies that coming down the pipeline as well. Head to downround.net.
Downround.net.
And sign up to Downround Premium.